Okay, got it. We live streamed. Yes.
Got it.
Are we live yet? Okay, yeah. All right, hello everyone. Yeah, so well, GM everyone, because today we're going to touch something on the DeFi side, and so today, well, me myself, Leslie here from Hong Kong, and then we also have Ella from Singapore, I believe, and then we also have Elias here from Bison Trails from London. So yeah, I would just do a quick introduction as like some of the our previous working experience with Bison Trails. As you may know, that many of our validators is actually provided by Bison Trails, and since the mainnet launched, they have already been providing very robust infrastructure to in order for the network to be stable and keeps running. And of course, well, Bison Trails is way more than just an infrastructure provider. On top of that, well, Elias, today we're definitely going to share something even more on top of the infrastructure they provide. And I will hand it to you, Elias. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Ella. Hello, everybody. My name is Elias. I am a protocol specialist at the Bison Trails team. And what I do is basically I'm the source of context together with my colleague Victor, who we run the protocol ops team with. We're basically the source of context for everything relating to layer ones that we support, layer ones that we might support, all the technology space around the layer ones that are live in the market and are getting traction and so on, and anything that lies between them, right? What binds them together. So it's a fairly broad scope of things that we look at, but it's a pretty vital and important role, because then we disseminate all this context across the organization. We use this context to help our customers understand things that they have queries around, and also to add as much value as we can to the networks that we work with and in their communities. So today I'm going to be talking to you about liquid staking, right? I'll get to the point of what we do as Bison Trails, I think, at the end, because that will be a little bit more punchy, I suppose. So let's dive straight into the subject. So I'm going to be talking to you about liquid staking, what it is, how it's been developing over the past couple years, starting from just a series of blog posts and people experimenting to like a multi-billion-dollar industry now, and looking like it's growing like wildfire. And it's particularly interesting for a Cronos context because and the hackathon context as well, because this is starting to look like liquid staking. Is becoming fundamental infrastructure for all proof of stake chains, like a core DeFi primitive. And it would be super interesting to see different propositions of liquid staking being built on the Cronos chain. And by the way, Leslie, Ella, and the whole team, congratulations on this hackathon and the launch. And generally, we're all very excited to see how Cronos develops here onwards. So without further ado, let me jump straight into it. I will share my screen. And let me know if you guys can see that. All good.
Okay.
Lovely. All right. So liquid staking, what it is, where it's at, and where it's going. So I'm going to start with a bit of a thesis. It might sound a bit aggressive, but all assets staked will eventually be liquid. So the gist here is that it might not be all staked assets, but the value proposition of liquid staking is so appealing that my prediction is that over time, a very large amount of the total stake mass in proof of stake networks will end up being consumed by some shape or form of liquid staking protocols. So what's liquid staking? It's not entirely what it sounds. It's not about liquefying stakes. So maybe let's backtrack a little bit and talk about DeFi before we go actually into liquid staking. So DeFi is pretty cool. It's grown from, I think, 1 billion back in like late 2019, 1 billion of value locked on Ethereum, with the majority of it being in Maker, to 200x that in about 2 years, which is pretty wild to think about. It's turning out to be a huge market. It's expanding super fast across chains, and I think we're very much past the point where the genie is irrevocably out of the bottle, and it's extremely hard to put it back in. So you have a very large market, and the two things that I want you to remember about DeFi, the two core principles that I think are really important to sort of distill things down. DeFi is many things, but I think the core value proposition of what makes DeFi interesting for users is that it collapses the opportunity cost of money. So DeFi is basically a collection of smart contracts that compose financial applications and then govern a chain of obligations from, between Elias and Leslie and Ella, and we can all share those obligations programmatically, which is a huge improvement compared to the traditional financial world, such that, for example, I can lend out $1 to Leslie, and then I can also have a token that represents Leslie's obligation to me, and then I can transfer that obligation to Ella for a trade. Ella might have like an NFT that I'm really interested in having in my collection, and then I can, but I'm out of money, right? It costs $1. She wants $1 for that. I have lent out my dollar to Leslie, and normally I would be out of money. But now in DeFi, I actually can transfer Leslie's obligation to Ella, and if she agrees, we can move forward with it without her having to think about chasing after Leslie in case he doesn't come up good with the money. So it's a huge improvement, and this is a very simple example. But once you start getting more people, larger scale, and more links in that chain of obligations, you're starting to see that it's actually like a pretty big deal. The second core principle that I'd like you to remember is that DeFi lives off collateral. More collateral equals more growth. Now, that there's a lot of nuance in that statement, in that some protocols are more capital efficient and they don't depend on the volume or the amount of collateral so much, but others are more. So to give you an example of what I mean about when I say DeFi lives off collateral, think of a lending protocol, right? Like Aave or Maker and so on. The purpose of this lending protocol is to lend out assets to users, earn some rate of interest, and then distribute it back to the protocol base, right? Whether that's a treasury or some token holders or whatnot. The more assets there are in there for the protocol to lend out, assuming there's matching demand, the more fees this protocol will generate, right? And if we start counting things by revenue is tied to fees are tied to collateral and the mass of collateral. Therefore, the more collateral you have, the more growth you get. All right, cool. So we got those down. Now, isn't this presentation about liquid staking? Why did I take about 5 minutes talking you through what is important, what is DeFi and what's important in DeFi? Well, if you think about the two things that we talked about before, collapsing the opportunity cost of money and the fact that you have a bunch of latent collateral trapped or quote unquote trapped in staking is basically what makes liquid staking valuable, right? So at a very high level, liquid staking is basically translating that example that I gave you with, my lending agreement with Leslie and me taking that tokenized obligation and engaging in a trade with Ella for that NFT, translated into a staking context, right? And we'll get into what that means in just a little while. So at the moment, there are about 125 billion of digital assets engaged in staking. Among think about the largest staking networks: Ethereum, which will soon be withdrawable, Solana, Polkadot, the Tendermint networks, Crypto.org chain. It's probably 125 billion, if not more, that is actually staking, right? We talked about before DeFi being at about $200 billion in total value locked, and we talked about how more collateral leads to more growth, right? That DeFi is basically hungry for collateral. Well, if you manage to somehow unlock this locked collateral or latent collateral, right? It's the nearest batch of new collateral that could be onboarded onto the DeFi ecosystem. You have about like a 70% growth in the total size of the market. So it's a pretty large opportunity, and it almost feels like the two opposites that sort of attract one another. And why also there's this magnetism between liquid staking and DeFi is that liquid staking derivatives are also really great collateral, right? They're like, to an extent, almost better adjusted for risk, of course, depending on the different protocols that support the issuing of these liquid staking derivatives. They are almost always better than the actual protocol token as collateral. And why is that? Because they earn a rate of return or rewards on top, right? So effectively, if you say lend out ETH on Maker, you have a margin call bandwidth, right? Below which your position would get liquidated and seized, and then you would keep the loan amount that you took out, but then you would lose your collateral. With liquid staking tokens, you actually have those margins, your threshold for getting margin called improving over time, because say over the course of a year, if you earn, I'm just going to pull a number and say 10% rate of return, now instead of having like an asset that is otherwise flat in its, when measured in its own terms, and let's forget about volatility for a minute, because we're comparing basically the asset itself and the asset in a form that also earns a 10% return or so. It's, again, adjusted for risk, strictly better. And that's a better user experience for DeFi users, colloquially known as apes. So, and it's also better UX because liquid staking allows for features that are not possible in actual staking, which is the near instant entry and exit from staking positions, right? And this is contingent upon many things, but where normally in staking, in order to stake an asset, you need to you need to run a validator, but also let's say that someone else, like for example Bison Trails, provides you with a platform for you to run a validator, but of course keep control of your and custody of your funds at all times. You're still subject to some onboarding and offboarding from the staking position time lags, right? Known as bonding and unbonding times in various networks. So with liquid staking, provided that there is enough liquidity somewhere for that token, instead of actually going through the flow that I just described before, you could just sell in and out of that AMM pool, for example. So we've talked a bunch about what liquid staking is. We haven't talked a lot about how it actually works. So I'm going to break this down into two sections: how it works for users and how it works from a protocol builder's perspective, right? Or the protocols that we see out there in the market at the moment. So the user experience on the liquid staking in liquid staking products is that you basically either deposit money or tokens in a pool, and then you receive a tokenized proof of your deposit back, or like I just mentioned earlier, you go and buy that tokenized proof of deposit if it's available in the market outright, right? So you don't even need to go through the deposit flow. But obviously, to get over the chicken and egg problem, this is only possible if someone else has deposited these tokens in the pool and has then made them available in some market, some AMM or otherwise. And then what users can do is that they can take these tokenized proofs of deposit and go to a DeFi protocol, a lending protocol, an AMM, a yield optimizer, and so on that supports this tokenized proof of deposit and make it work, lend it out, put it in a yield optimizer, provide liquidity for an AMM, and so on. And the result is, of course, that your return multiplies, right? So while you were making, say, a flat 10% with your assets just staking, you're now also able to earn an additional return, which comes from the auxiliary activities that you're engaging in with your liquid staking token. Now, on the protocol side, what these protocols do, or how at least they work in present day for the most part, is that basically once these tokens, once the protocol tokens, say ETH, for example, or CRO in crypto.org's case, are in the pool, then they issue a token immediately in return, right, to the users that deployed in the pool. Then once there's a significant, you can, in various networks, there's some thresholds that need to be covered in order for then the deploy part of the flow to become available. In others, it's more straightforward. But what then these protocols do is that they draw from that pool and then they deploy the deposit mass into staking, right? So on Ethereum, for example, on Ethereum 2, because the protocol is pure proof of stake and it doesn't natively enable delegation, this involves going through the deposit contract flow and then deploying batches of 32 ETH on validators that are basically, have the engines running and they're ready to go once the passenger, which is the 32 ETH, actually gets into place. And then you can imagine that after this, equivalently, sorry, before I go into the return and rewards part, in other networks that natively enable delegation, this is a little bit more straightforward, right? So most of the models that I've seen involve, again, pooling deposits in the beginning of the queue in an account or several accounts that are controlled by the protocol, and then deploying them not by directly depositing, but by delegating them to a series of validators that might be decided by governance or otherwise, right? And then what happens is that while this stake mass is delegated or deposited on On validators, it earns a return, and the protocol basically passes that return back over to the pool's depositors in a pro rata basis, and keeps a percentage for the useful work that they provide to users, similar to how delegation might work in most Tendermint-based networks. Okay, so if you've been paying attention so far, there's a pretty glaring question that must have popped while I was going through this whole liquid staking story, and that is, well, if the stake is liquid, what is actually at stake, right? Doesn't that get us to the nothing at stake problem, as it's known? And in fact, I think a couple of years back, when this conversation around liquid staking started, this was actually one of the main concerns, right? Like, if we make the stake liquid, then doesn't that severely impact the security guarantees of said protocol? It doesn't look like that's the case, and I'll walk you through a quick example to show you why. So here we have Farmer Freddy that has 1,000 ETH, and Farmer Fred deposits that 1,000 ETH in a pool, and then gets 1,000 ST ETH back, and then goes deposits it in a farm in DeFi, right? And earns more return over that. Then what happens is that as these tokens are staking from the pool, they grow in value. So there's that 10% that we were talking about. So suddenly 1,000 ETH that were in the pool, and let's assume that Freddy Farmer was the only depositor in the pool. He's the entire pool. He earns that 10%, and now his ETH deposit is worth 1,100 ETH, which then translates into 1,100 ST ETH, right? And he's still farming with those. And then there's an oracle, if this is the A token model that this particular protocol is pursuing, which is increasing the quantity of these derivative tokens through an oracle in the middle that basically looks at the state of the chain, the layer one chain, where these tokens are staking, and the state of the chain where this protocol lives. And Farmer Fred is super happy because he just made money. Now, this is the crucial part, which is basically the security guarantee, right? What happens if that, say 10 ETH gets actually slashed because one of the validators that that the pool deployed to misbehaved for some reason, right? Maybe they were offline for too long. Maybe they double signed a block, and the protocol considers that to be a slashable offense, and they lose 10 ETH. So what happens then? The pool's balance gets updated to 1090 ETH, and then through that oracle mechanism, the quantity, or if it's a C token model, the value of the liquid staking derivative tokens actually decreases, right? Equivalently, if the whole amount was wiped out in a major slashing event, which is extremely rare, but in some cases it could happen. It equivalently, it would also wipe out the whole balance of SEETH. So while Farmer Fred had 1,100 STETH in some farm, in the next block after this chain of obligations again has been updated, then he has 0, right? So at the end of the day, the stake is still at stake because exactly of this programmability that smart contracts and Oracle systems and so on enable us to do. Now, there's a lot of security holes that you could point to in the model that don't make it a one-for-one, that the stake is still at stake, but still at a very high level, liquid staking doesn't necessarily take away from the core security guarantees of the protocol. Now, thinking about what types of protocols we see out there, it's a spectrum, right? Like everything, and the spectrum is normally distributed from decentralized to centralized. And here I'm sort of using mixed examples between kind of wrapped tokens and liquid staking, because liquid staking tokens are a form of wrapped tokens, right? Like that, if you know WBTC and the work they've been doing, they have been kind of like a pioneer in this wrapped token industry. And so it's a spectrum between very decentralized and centralized, right? And in the middle, you have hybrid forms, like, for example, Lido. And on the extremely decentralized, or the far left of this spectrum, you would have someone like Keep, which uses threshold signatures and all kinds of other mechanisms to basically remove centralization choke points from the model. And on the far right, you would have a large exchange, for example, issuing their own staking token, but then keeping custody of all the customer funds, and then maybe having it only exist in a sandbox environment and so on. So, if you're thinking about building a protocol like that, you should also acknowledge that you could take many different theses, and you could land on many different spots on this particular spectrum, right? And basically, the furthest you go to the right of this particular spectrum, the more you basically substitute reputation for trustlessness, right? And that's okay. That's something that the market actually prefers. So if we're to go to the example of WBTC again, which I think is a pretty interesting precedent that can give us maybe a hint about how the whole liquid staking market is going to develop. You'll see that WBTC, which is more, it lands more on the right-hand side of the spectrum that I showed you before, has actually dominated this market, right? And it's partly because simplicity and capital efficiency really matter to this to the market and the market participants and the users of these protocols. Now, the difference is that on BTC, you can't natively deploy smart contracts, which is something that you can do in most, if not all, staking chains, and thereafter liquid staking tokens. So I don't expect that it will translate one-to-one, but I think it's a pretty interesting precedent to be keeping in mind. Another thing that will be probably useful for anybody that's out there interested in this space and looking to build a protocol or hack one over the hackathon is that standards matter, right? And this is maybe not something that is initially it's not priority zero, but it will become priority zero very soon after you might go to market with something like that. So if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, did it actually ever fall? And this is this type of logic can exactly translate in a liquid staking derivative that doesn't have the breadth of integrations. Because when I hold an asset and I can do nothing with it, then it's as good as me just not holding it or holding the actual staking token, right? That has much higher security guarantees than the liquid staking derivative would. However, once there are many things that I could do with this liquid staking token, like go and provide liquidity on an AMM, like lend it out in a lending protocol, or leverage up and go, yield farm with DAI or AUSD, or name your favorite stablecoin, then there is the risk to reward actually changes pretty drastically, right? So integrations and standards really really matter. And the market is moving pretty fast as well. Like we've come a pretty long way from the beginning of January 2021 in about 10 months. This is a snapshot of a dashboard I've put together on Dune Analytics, Dune.xyz, which basically tracks the state of the market on Ethereum layer 1. And as you can see, the market has been exploding in the last 10 months, with about 5.5 billion locked in ETH pools, which represents about 20% of the total ETH staking on Ethereum 2. And Lido is head and shoulders above everybody else with about 90% market share there. But Ethereum is really not the only market, right? Like Ethereum started it all, like with a lot of things that we see around us in this industry. But it's specifically from the summer onwards, it started expanding really fast onto other chains. And so now we have liquid staking derivatives on Terra, with Liquid Luna. We have liquid staking derivatives on Solana, which are actually close to hitting the 1 billion threshold in value. Liquid staking derivatives are launching on Near. The Akala team has launched liquid staking derivative protocol on Karura. So we have Kusama liquid staking derivatives, and soon when the Akala parachain launches on Polkadot mainnet, dots will become liquid, and so on. And so you see where this is going. The momentum is actually really significant, and I think we're once again past the point where we can put the genie back in the bottle. So to kind of summarize and give you a little bit more of a view into what the ingredients are that you will need if you think about building a liquid staking protocol. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but this is just to give you kind of like a blueprint or a very high level understanding of what that entails. There are 5 things mainly, right? You will need validators, which are arguably one of the most, if not the most important aspect of your model. If you don't have validators, you don't have staking. If you don't have staking, you don't have a liquid staking token. So getting a group of validators together, then having a smart contract apparatus that can take care of all the flow that we discussed before, from deposit to issuing the token to managing the obligations to the Oracle system and so on. A lot of the protocols that we see out there are taking the form of a DAO, right? To basically manage the developers that are building the smart contracts, or glue them together rather, and not manage them. The developers that are building the smart contracts, the validators that are running the stake and generating the rewards, the partners of the broader ecosystem, right? And integrators and so on, and make sure that everybody's aligned, come under a DAO umbrella. And so a well-functioning DAO also needs certain sets of tools, starting from the most rudimentary one, like a Discord or a Telegram chat, to more advanced ones like a multi-sig, common accounts, a treasury, a governance forum, a bunch of things. Then that brings me to the next point, which is you need governance rules, right? And this is a little bit softer than the others above, but equally important. Having clear rules about how the protocol works, and basically inspiring into everybody that's involved in that assortment of people and technology and so on, that what to expect, right? And if you and everybody has a meaningful amount of agency that they can affect on the protocol. And finally, it's integrations, right? And we touched a fair bit on that point earlier in the presentation. All right, so now on to the fun stuff, which is how can we help you build a liquid staking product on Cronos? So first, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what Bison Trails does. I've put a bison there with a bunch of logos of different proof of stake chains. Fun fact: the bison is the strongest and largest mammal in North America, and it has like its back is full of muscle. And it can really hold a lot of weight on it. And this is exactly what we do, right? We build infrastructure to help any and all layer one networks and beyond to scale and maintain basically the security guarantees and the liveness guarantees and all the good stuff that they actually set out to achieve. And so we, a large part of our business is running infrastructure for validators. We have a platform on which people can come and spin up a validator through a point and click interface and then use their funds in order to actually access protocol returns. We have a product line of query and transaction nodes. These are read-write nodes, basically your gateway into reading and writing data on the blockchain. Any smart contract application uses these nodes in order to communicate with the blockchain. And we have a series of other products that we're developing that we'll be super excited to share with you in the coming months. So given that this is what we do, if you ever hack away a liquid staking protocol on Cronos, and with the outcome being that you're attempting at least to make CRO tokens liquid, then you could come and talk to us about running the validator aspect of things, right? Or you could elect to run a validator on our infrastructure so that you can then power the rewards generation for your liquid staking protocol. So I suppose this is it. Thank you all, Leslie and Ella. If you want to learn more, you can follow me on Twitter at Elias Simos. And obviously, if you're interested in working with us or have questions about how we work and so on, my DMs are always open. So more than happy to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so strongly recommend follow Elias on Twitter because I'm one of his followers, and there's a lot of very interesting content. And also, I think that you have been intensively working on the dashboard thing in the previous several months. Yeah, and I personally use it quite a lot to keep track of the data. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, I think. Ella, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a few personal questions on the liquid staking topic, especially for Cronos. We are really embracing the future of the multi-chain ecosystem, right? And we're also quite uniquely positioned in that space, being like a Cosmos chain with EVM compatibility, and we also have a parallel chain, as you mentioned, crypto.org chain. So I'm curious to hear, like, what do you think this liquid staking space would look like in the multi-chain world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it would look like pretty much any other token, right? Like these tokens would act as exactly the same as any other token. So it would behave in the way that Bitcoin would behave. So let's unpack what a multi-chain world means for a minute here. In my mind, what this vision is about is like all of these environments that are kind of siloed away on their own, being able to talk to each other near seamlessly, right? So I can transfer asset A from chain A to chain B and then over to chain C without much hurdle, with a pleasant user experience, or like not even a user experience, right? The user in that case is like the protocol in the middle. So what does that do? I think what it does is open up a very wide field of economic opportunity, right? And what it, where I think one of the equilibria that we would land on is that we would potentially have specialized sort of facilities, right, that are maybe their own chains or maybe operate cross chains and so on, that do that provide certain products. So let's say a yield optimizer that works cross chain, right? Like maybe Yearn would do that, or maybe someone else. And that's a lot more powerful product than a single chain yield optimizer, because it can go and find and access all these different markets, whereas the yield optimizer that's only in one environment can only see what exists in that environment. And I think almost always the cross-chain one would win. And so if then we end up with these specialized protocols that look over the whole ecosystem of chains and then distribute assets in order to get the best yield or get the best interest rate, if it's a lending protocol or something else, we would actually end up, and if we have this like cross-chain perfect interoperability, we would end up with a bunch of these tokens that represent native staking assets being in completely different ecosystems, right? So you would end up with like dots on Ethereum and or liquid dots on Ethereum and liquid ETH on Tendermint and so on. So it will be interesting. I think we're ways from getting there. There's a lot of good people doing really good work on the cross-chain interoperability side, attacking it from all sides. I think we're still pretty early. I'm having a lot of conversations with folks that are tackling that problem area. And although it feels like there's a lot of good propositions on the table, I think there's we just have to see them work in practice, right? There's obviously IBC, which is great, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing that sort of ecosystem, the whole Tendermint ecosystem, coalesce together. But I wouldn't hold my breath. I think we're ways from that, maybe two or 3 years until we really kind of like start seeing the cross-chain ecosystem take effect in that more seamless way that I just described.
Yep, for sure. And kind of like what we briefly discussed before the meeting starts, right? Like it will be very interesting to see some liquid staking solution occur on crypto.org chain, and then the staked CRO token can be bridged over to Cronos, and you can do all kinds of crazy DeFi stuff with that stake token. Entirely.
I'm super excited for that. And as I said, we're always here. We're always happy to talk to builders. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I might have a more practical question that some of the user hesitating in doing the liquid staking might have. It's like, okay, of course, the liquid staking provides very nice opportunities while you stake the token, while you want to make good use of it, you want to squeeze the last bit of the juice out of it and leverage it and use it as like a collateral, lending, whatever, crazy device stuff. And but underneath, I think you have also mentioned in your slides is indeed stake the token. So while it would be, the token stick to the validator, and if they misbehave, for example, in the crypto chain case, you will be slashed by like 5%. And I'm just curious on like what is like the common practice of other projects as well on providing this liquid staking services. How do they tackle this like uncertainty?
So there is
besides picking, Bison Trail as a validator.
Yeah, it's a great question. Basically, we talked about the lifeblood of the system being the validators and the validator operators, right? Like a useful, I think, analogy that I always like to bring is that, you know, proof of work is basically a function where you have electricity and computing power as inputs, and you get security over on the other end. Proof of stake is value at risk, the stake, and the operator's capabilities as inputs, and then you get security out on the other end, right? So you basically have to optimize for the operational chops of the validator operators that you're deciding to work with, right? And there's like, we're really good at it, but there's a lot of great people out there as well. But we take extra care to be the North Star that we're always sort of looking towards in our presence in all of the networks that we support, is to, you know, security first, never get slashed, don't try fancy setups and so on that increase the risk threshold, even if it's at the expense of just missing like a few bips of rewards and so on. So that's part number one. Just make sure that you have like a good set of validators that are powering your protocol, and also like incentivize them appropriately, right? Like you can have like incentives on top of the protocol incentives, because, you know, you're a meta protocol effectively as a liquid staking token issuer. Maybe have an incentive system on top that pushes your validator operators to actually take extra care, right? And get rewards for it, or get penalized doubly if they if they actually end up misbehaving, or, you know, they're having uptime issues that remain unaddressed for a while, and so on. But the one like interesting thing that you get, so pooling is like a weird kind of concept, right? Because pooling user funds and so on, there are, you know, parts of the market, like the more institutional side of the market, that is not comfortable in participating in fund pooling and so on for various reasons, right, including regulatory ones. But so that's like one of the things that I think are not, you know, super desirable about pooling. The good thing about pooling is that if there is, you know, say one operator out of your 8, and obviously the more operators you have, the more hedged out you are as a liquid staking protocol, right? Assuming that all these operators take good care to also not overlap, because if you have 8 operators and they're all operating out of AWS Northeast, then, you know, you've decentralized and then you've re-centralized. So coordination between operators is also a pretty important aspect to keep in mind. But back to the pooling thing, is that if you get slashed, then the slashing penalty gets socialized among all the pool participants. So, you know, if I'm holding, you know, if I deposited the tokens that were actually then slashed, I'm not actually going to lose all the tokens. I'm just going to lose a percentage that this slashing reflects of the pro rata in a pro rata sense from the whole total of the pool's stake mass. So a lot of things to consider. Slashing is always a risk, but you know, we would, I guess, never go to the moon if we were afraid of space.
For sure. And I also want to comment on that, like from a different, like the financial product, you know, angle, right? Like, you know, because it's a derivative, and then you can also always do all kind of financial engineering around kind of segment this, the risk and return to different tranches, and maybe like, I don't know, add on an insurance on top of that, like a slashing insurance, etc. So it also opens up a lot of design space for the, you know, the engineers in the DeFi space. Like, how can we you know, provide DeFi financial product around staked tokens to meet different risk and return appetite for, you know, different user base.
For sure, 100%. There's the design space is super big. The opportunity is also like pretty large, because I mean, no dig to the products that exist around these these protocols and liquid staking tokens and so on, but they're not great, right? Like insurance wise, you normally don't get well-priced insurance. So it eats into a lot of the rewards that you're actually set out to achieve, to an extent that it actually might prevent a lot of users from actually using the product, or making it, like, at the end untenable. So these are, I mean, I say that, but also this market hasn't existed for more than 10 months in like a meaningful way. So it's still, I hate every time I say this, but it's still early. And there's always like some little strand and branch of this industry that it's early on. And it's actually a pretty happy place to be. So yeah, definitely echo whatever you mentioned, Ella, and would encourage any, DeFi builders, financial engineers that are interested in kind of getting stuck in this space to definitely tackle it, because it can take a lot of innovation.
Yeah, and I guess also when people building a liquid staking protocol, something that always have to emphasize is the DAO model, because underneath, well, you're actually sticking some assets in some other chain, and then that will be the governance proposal, that will be some on-chain governance happening. And if you're putting a lot of tokens of that system, and then you stick, but you're not voting, you're not taking part into the governance of the original chain, that will be something not very very nice to the original chain, and also the ecosystem of the original chain. Yeah.
Yep. Very true. Very true. Again, we're still early, right? There's like accidents will happen, but this is how we learn. Another word that I really hate using is anti-fragile, right? But it's actually pretty good in describing what we've seen of DeFi in the last couple of years. It basically means the more you hit something, the stronger it gets. And there's been a couple of main events, but really, like, it's also like it happens in smaller increments that we don't necessarily pay attention to. But March 2020 was a pretty good example of anti-fragility in DeFi, right? The system crashed, a bunch of gaping holes were exposed to everybody that is building in the industry or using products or exists as an account on the Ethereum chain at the time. And this is the revelation of opportunity, right? Opportunity for protocols to get their shit together and like plug those holes, right? Opportunities for entrepreneurs to get in the space and actually create solutions for where these problems lie exposed, and so on. So, the volatility, both price-wise, but also like emotionally, is hard to stomach. Not gonna lie about that, right? It's anxious sometimes, but also it's like the way we grow. And so, more experimentation, please, more taking protocols and ideas to their extremes. Obviously, first, I would encourage everybody to like have principles in how you do that, right? Like don't go out and try and put people in danger, but within reason, try and be good, try and offer value to people, your users, and so on. But push the envelope, because this is how we learn. This is how we all learn. So I'm excited to see more people experimenting.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, we're still early. There's so much opportunities in the space. I think that's perfectly conclude today's session. Thank you so much, Elias, for the great learning session for us and our audience about liquid staking.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Yeah, reactive.
All right, have a good night. for us.
Should I drop? Yep.
Yeah, I think so.